What's going on, YouTube? Welcome to Start to Finish Farming. Today we have a Farmall H here. Hasn't been running in probably about 2 years. I finally did a little messing around with it the other day, got it running enough to where I can get it in the shop. Ended up having carburetor issues, ended up getting a rebuild kit and a new float. The float was cracked, allowing the fuel to go inside the float and sinking it, flooding out the carburetor. Now, since I've gotten it going, it is running a little bit rough. It's got a skip, and also when you throttle it up real fast, it wants to fall on its face until it gets up to RPMs, which could also be the carburetor. But what I want to try to do is get this timed and make sure that the timing is good on the tractor. I originally got this as a restored tractor, but when they went to finally drive it and fire it up, they realized that the motor was locked. And so I pulled the head off, freed the pistons, cleaned everything out, honed them, put it back together with a new head gasket and valve cover gasket. Didn't really get carried away with this one. And one thing led to another. It sat for a long time, and now we're getting it back out again. So also what I'm going to check here is the gap on the points. I'm just going to turn the distributor housing until the rubbing block on the points is on the high side of the cam, which would be this part of the points on this side of this cam. So I'm just going to rotate for now the whole distributor with the ignition off. If I can get it to focus, I'm going to rotate the distributor until it's on the high part of that cam right there, and the points would be open. And then I'm going to use feeler gauges, clean them out first, but then I'm going to use feeler gauges to check it. So the first thing I'm going to do for safe measure is get in there some 400 grit, real light sandpaper, and just clean the ends of the points off. You don't got to get carried away. You don't want to use something too abrasive either. Sometimes you can fold it a couple of times until it splits the points a little bit. And just get it in there and rub it up and down. That way the points put a little pressure on the sandpaper. You make sure both sides get it. Now what I'm going to do is take my feeler gauge, 2/100 of an inch. I'm going to stick it down in between the 2 points. It's a little loose, not terrible though. And I'm going to tighten those points up by loosening this screw here and closing the points on this a little bit until it's just snug, pulling this feeler gauge in and out. So now I got that snugged up. The other thing I realized was that this bolt here was missing. So these points were just moving freely. They had all the movement they wanted. So I found a bolt in my bolt bin that was the right size for that. And now you can see I can get my feeler gauge right in there. Right there, and it's snug between the two contacts, but it's not pushing the spring out. It's not pushing this out when I put this gauge in there. So that's good. So you can see I've already messed with this a little bit. It was more so just when it was first running initially, and it was kind of popping and skipping, and I just try to do it by ear a little bit just to get it into the shop. You can see where it was, and this was another spot that it ran pretty all right in. So I'm going to be somewhere around in here, but I just want to verify that I'm pretty much right on the exact point of timing to see if that's why it runs a little bit rough. I wouldn't be surprised if that's not the problem, but it doesn't hurt to check. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna pull out this number 1 plug. I'm gonna bring the piston to the top dead center position on the compression stroke. And one way you can do that is by pulling out the piston and using a compressor gauge. And as you rotate the motor over, when you start getting pressure on that gauge, you know that you're on the compression stroke. You can also put a small piece of paper towel or paper over the port of the hole, and as you crank it over, if it flutters out, you're also on your compression stroke. I typically tend to just use my finger and my thumb, and usually I can get a good idea if I'm on compression stroke or not. The other thing that you can do if you know that you're pretty close to timing is turning it over and then pulling off the distributor cap and seeing if the rotor is pointed to the number 1 wire or close to it, and then that should be your compression stroke on the number 1 cylinder as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this plug off. I'm going to get a screwdriver of some sort and stick it down in there and turn the motor over on the compression stroke until the screwdriver gets pushed all the way out. And if it just starts to go in a little bit, you know that you went too far. You can turn it back a little bit until you're right up at the top dead center or close to it. And then we're going to use the timing marks on the crank pulley to figure out exactly where our perfect timing should be. So I'm going to get in here, and I'm just using a 7/8 socket on this. I haven't looked for my 7/8 I haven't looked for my 7/8 spark plug wrench. And before you do this, obviously you want to make sure that the battery is disconnected from the tractor. You can just turn the ignition switch off, but it's safer just to disconnect the battery. So you can tell I've been overfueling a little bit because they're a little bit wet. But I have been doing a lot of messing around with that carburetor, and it's still not running right. Now I did pull these off the other day and clean the plugs and had very minimal run time, maybe about 2 or 3 minutes since I put the plugs back in. But you can see it, they're a little wet here around the threads. So this is looking inside the porthole on the number 1 cylinder. Number 1 is always the closest to the radiator. You can see I got a little schmutz up there on the top. Like I said, this tractor really hasn't been run at all. Part of the skipping and the smoking could probably be the rings, either 1 needing to be replaced or 2 getting it up to temperature, running it under load and seeing if I can free the rings up or reseat them. I'm not overly concerned about that right now. But what we should do is turn this motor over, and see the piston start to rise up in that porthole. And once you see it rising up, you know that you're close, and to get your screwdriver or your pick or whatever you use and put it in there. But make sure that you're on the compression stroke. Get my light. Turn it over. Now it does feel a little low on compression. Going back down. Now when I stick my finger in there and I start to turn it over, it's a lot tighter, a lot harder to turn the motor, and I can hear air escaping between the porthole and my finger, blowing towards me. So that's how I know we're on the compression stroke. Let's see if we can see in there a little bit. Now right there you can just start to see the piston. The top of the piston. Turn it over, you'll see it come up a little bit. See, I'll go back down a little bit. Come back up. You can see the piston rising up in the cylinder there. So what I'm gonna do is put this screwdriver in there. Feel it coming up, feel it coming up, coming up. Should be close right there. As you turn it and you get a feel for it, you can also just tell by looking at it. Now it's kind of hard to see, but that's the top of the piston right there. You can see just how oily it looks. So very, very, very good chance this is going to need rings. Doesn't smoke quite as bad as I thought that it would for how dirty those look, but that's why I gotta mess with this timing, make sure the timing's right, make sure it's firing when it should be, cleaning up those cylinders. Now if we come over here, now if we look right there, you can see the timing pointer on the block, and you can see two grooves. If you look at the top of the flashlight, one groove there and one groove there. Okay. Not all the tractors have these. Some of the newer model Farmalls do. Some of my H's or my C's do, some don't. So now what I just did was turn the pulley by hand until the first notch was just even with to a hair past the needle on the side of the block. As this pulley turns, you want the spark to be at when that needle is completely even with that line, or when that line goes past the needle and is in between the two lines. Now I'm doing this a different way than what I've normally done. I'm going to see how this works here. So in the book, it says to pull off the wire coming from the coil, going to the distributor cap, and putting it about 1/8 of an inch away from the wire going from the coil to the distributor housing. So what I did here was pulled the wire off of the coil and put it through the wire that goes from the coil to the distributor itself, and left a little bit of a gap there. So hopefully that's enough to get it where it needs to be so that it can create an arc. And now I'll hook the battery back up, turn the ignition switch on, and then loosen these two bolts and rotate the distributor until we get an arc coming from here. So right now I just have this battery stuffed in here quick. It's something I had laying around. Get that terminal on there. Pretty tight. I'm gonna come over here, gonna turning the ignition on by pulling that out. Just because I'm going to come underneath here and turn the fuel off. I'm going to come over here again, loosen up the bolts on the distributor. Like I said before, they're 9/16. Not too much, just enough. Then I'm going to get this wire just close enough to make an arc, about 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch, or 1/8 to 1/16 of an inch away. That should be good. So on this tractor, the pulley or the cam turns clockwise if you're facing the front of the tractor, and the rotor in the distributor turns clockwise as well. When you turn the distributor forward in the same rotation that the rotor turns or the motor turns, that's retarding the motor or retarding the timing. If you turn the distributor counterclockwise in the opposite direction that the rotor turns, that's advancing the timing. I should get an arc. I got arc right here. Now what I'm going to do to verify is I'm going to pull the cap off, and I'm going to make sure that the rotor is pointing towards this part of the distributor cap, the number 1 cylinder. The ignition is turned off. That clip. This clip. The rotor is pointing just pretty close to that. All right, now that we've got the timing down, just because I had the spark plug out and I didn't do them the other day, I'm going to check the gaps on the spark plugs here. For the H is cold, book spec is 0.023. So once again, get your feeler gauges here. And I actually don't have a 0.023, and none of the combinations I have will get me that, so I'm using a 0.024, and I'm just going to make it really snug. So pretty much all you're going to do is get the spark plug, and what we're looking for is, you can see it in the light there, this gap right here. This is what we're testing. And you really want to make sure that this is pretty close to the right spec. So pretty much, if this one feels a little bit loose right here, it means it's too wide. We're going to put our feeler gauge in there, a little bit too loose. So what I'm going to do, a lot of people have their own ways. Usually what I do is I check it out with my feeler gauges here. Put it in there, see how much it moves around. If it's too loose, put it on a table, just like this, and I just push this point down a little bit, just a little bit. Put some pressure on the tip, not too much. You don't want to bend it all the way in the electrode, but check it. That's actually perfect, that's pretty tight. And if you go a little bit too much or it's too tight, what I usually do is I get my spark plug here. I recommend not using a screwdriver and prying between the electrode and this conductor part there. What I usually do is put my pliers right here and then just pull up a little bit. Just a little bit. Just a little pressure. And it usually gets me in the right range. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull off the spark plugs from the other cylinders and check all the gaps on those, just to make sure since I'm already here. Fires right up. Well, thanks a lot, everybody. We got the tractor running a lot better. See how it sounds and fine tune it from there. If you guys have any questions, leave a comment. If there's anything that you'd like to see me go over even further in depth, leave a comment below. If you'd like to see a very detailed video on how the carburetor works, not only how to do the rebuild, but how the carburetor actually works, how the jets work with each other, where the main air comes from, everything like that, leave a comment below. Give me a like on the video, subscribe, and we'll get it done. So thanks for watching, everybody.